Hi everyone, I'm Chassidy Goggins, the Media and Marketing Coordinator at Columbia Theological Seminary, specifically at the Center for Lifelong Learning. I am here today with Helen Blier. Helen, how are you today?
I am well, and I couldn't tell you how happy I am to be here talking with you, Chassidy.
I feel pretty good about talking to you too, Helen.
Awesome.
You guys see we have our coordinating spectacles on today. Helen and I love a good frame here at the Center for Lifelong Learning.
Absolutely.
So Helen, tell me about your background. We know that you are the new Lifelong Learning Director at Columbia Theological Seminary. So tell me about how that came about. You've been with us for about a year. Where did you come from, and what does your new role consist of?
Oh, I have to tell you, I couldn't be more excited to be here. And it's been one of those long and winding paths. I have been a little bit of a vocational mutt during my professional time. I started off, if you can believe it, as a high school teacher.
Oh,
and,
what grade did you teach?
I taught high school. I taught first-year students, sophomores, and juniors. I didn't want to touch the seniors. They were just too sassy for me. And I fell in love with the work of teaching and the work of education more broadly. I began to understand a little bit differently the real power and depth of education and how we learn across our lives. And I wanted to commit myself to work that leaned into that power, leaned into that possibility, and worked with folks really to help them mine their life experience for the kinds of insights that would help them live more meaningfully and joyfully. And that has pretty much written the story of what I've been involved in. After teaching high school, I went to graduate school. My goal there was to dive a little bit more deeply into what constituted and sustained an ongoing vocation among people who were teachers, and I would add to that ministers. After that, I ended up teaching in ministry programs. I worked at ATS, the accrediting agency, for some time. And then I had the opportunity to take what I had learned at a kind of global or crow's nest level and implement it in a local community to see if this stuff really made a difference. And I ended up taking on the position of Director of Continuing Education at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. And that's really where I fell in love with the real work of lifelong learning and continuing education, and became convinced of its worth and power, particularly in the world of theological education. Our conversations around theological education have typically centered on degree programs as the primary preparation for ministry.
Yes.
You know as well as I do that ministry, teaching, any one of these practices related fields, you can't get everything you're ever going to need to know in a single degree program. Exactly. So how can we, with these resources in an educational institution like here at Columbia, provide access points to those resources in an ongoing way for those who are doing this really hard work out there and need access to the community, the information, the expertise that helps them do what they do excellently and over time. So that's how I ended up here.
I love that. Talk a little bit more about what you mean by access points in theological education.
Think about a theological school. A theological school has a wealth of intellectual, social, vocational capital. We've got faculty who know so much. We've got practitioners who are able to do excellent work. We've got libraries. We have access to people out in the community who are at the top of their game, leaders in their field. And then we have practitioners out there leading churches, working in nonprofit ministries. What we can do as a theological school is create gateways to these resources for people who might not necessarily have the time, the interest, the resources to pursue a full-on degree program, or maybe already did that at some point. But we can still give them access to these good things that they need in order to continue to enhance their work and to find connection with peers, get some peer support in order to be able to do what they do in less isolation and with more hope and energy.
Love that, Helen. So I know this because I looked at your resume and I was involved in your hiring process. So
Yes,
I know this about you, that you would describe yourself as an innovator within theological education. Talk to us about what that means, what that looks like to innovate within this sphere of education.
That's a great question, Chassidy. One of my favorite words it's a French word. It's bricoleur. The French female would be, or feminine would be bricoleuse. This is somebody who's a tinkerer. If you think of like an old style handy person where they've got a couple of tools and maybe some old hardware and there's a problem, and what they have to do, they've got to be like MacGyver. Do you remember MacGyver? They've got to take some simple tools and solve a problem, move ahead with something. I think of that kind of innovation as the heart and soul of where theological education needs to go today. So when I think about innovation within this sphere, as you asked, I think about taking the wisdom that we already have, the traditions that we have, the educational practices, the communities, the tools that we have at hand, and trying to reconfigure that material in new ways in order to address new problems that might have never been imagined when those tools were originally built years ago.
Yes.
We have to be MacGyvers in theological education.
Yes.
One of the analogies that I bring up is, well, hey, is there any theological school that was teaching a class on how to do Zoom worship back in the early 20-teens?
Well, Helen, can we just take a moment to acknowledge the Zoom fails that I'm sure we all encountered during the pandemic?
And
just a moment of silence for...
Okay. But we all had to learn while we were running the race, right? Because, well, schools can't be faulted for not having seen this pandemic coming down the pike. So how can a school which ostensibly trains people or helps to advance people in their ministerial vocations, how can they resource folks when these new problems come up?
Yes.
That's what Centers for Lifelong Learning are about. We're about helping people who are addressing new and sometimes unprecedented situations figure out how they have around them, within themselves, and access to the materials that they need, the knowledge that they need to solve that problem. So I think of us as less about giving people a thing that they can use and more about providing a context in which they can activate their imaginations and learn how to creatively solve the problems that will inevitably confront them. We're kind of a laboratory, a think tank, if you will, for new stuff that's happening out there in the world that ministers need to respond to. That I find to be the most exciting work. How do we help people do that?
Awesome sauce. So, Helen, as we close out our interview, our conversation today, I have a two-parter for you.
Okay.
First part of the question is, because we've talked about the emphasis that degree programs have within education. And so first part of the question says, what is lifelong learning not? And then the second part of the question is, what do you envision for the Center for Lifelong Learning here at Columbia Theological Seminary?
Two more good questions. Thanks, Chassidy. The Center for Lifelong Learning is not, it's not a degree program. It is not a strict credentialing program. It is firmly rooted in peer and adult learning practices. There are some degree programs that do make the best of adult learning practices. Not all of them do. But we are responsive to things that happen in the world of ministry that need an intervention, that need activity, that need insight. Whereas degree programs tend to be more conserving in their energy. They tend to, well, it takes a long time to develop a degree program. If you've ever been in a theological school that's going through curriculum revision, you're talking about a 2, 3, 4-year process from when the faculty decide a curriculum revision needs to happen to when it is actually implemented. That is a really long trajectory. lifelong learning programs are able to be more nimble and pull things together on a much shorter timeline. So I don't think of us as being in competition with degree programs. I do think we need to emphasize the value of wisdom that has stood the test of time.
Absolutely.
But I think we also, to use a good improvisational phrase, and we need to be able to be responsive to things that happen that we couldn't have anticipated, and provide just-in-time education for people, just-in-time opportunities to reflect and to gain new insight so that they can do things, because their ministry work, it's not going to wait. And in terms of what I envision for the Center for Lifelong Learning, that's a great question as well. I joined the team here because I saw Columbia Theological Seminary's deep commitment structurally and culturally to the work of lifelong learning. It has a long reputation of not only providing excellent programs, but of being a leader in the field. I hope we're able to move even more deeply into that work, that we continue with the excellent programs that we offer people who want to learn more about the best practices in leadership, in congregations, in nonprofit settings, that we provide depth encounters to enhance their spirituality through programs like our Center for our Certificate in Spiritual Formation, our Certificate in Spiritual Direction. But we are also becoming a leader among leaders. So as more schools are beginning to get the memo that, hey, lifelong learning is a really important part of the future of theological education, they are increasingly turning to the staff and the work here at Columbia Theological Seminary for insight and expertise in terms of how to build a sustainable program that capitalizes on their existing assets, that helps them imagine economic models that are going to work, that helps them imagine the administrative and organizational structures, even the ways to engage excellent program design. They turn to us for that, and I hope we're able to move more intentionally and structurally into that work of leading in that field. So we become a leader not only for pastoral leaders, but a leader for lifelong learning leaders.
So Helen, speaking of things that seminary did not prepare us for, is lifelong learning the answer to that?
That's a really interesting way to sort of position lifelong learning vis-a-vis a degree program. I think degree programs are good at being degree programs. They're an opportunity for us, as I said before, to go deep in a field, to marinate in something that we love and want to think about more. But anything that is a practices-related field really requires on-the-job learning. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that degree programs don't teach people because they can't teach people. Think about it. Would you want a doctor who had done nothing except read books?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Nor would you want a doctor who hadn't learned anything new in the last 15 or 20 years.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I think what lifelong learning can do is provide an opportunity to help people who are in a practices-related field understand that their ongoing competence, even excellence in that field, requires them to learn continuously. What we do is provide structured opportunities for that to happen as they enter their field of work, whether it's leading a congregation or doing Christian education or working as a chaplain. There are going to be situations that come up, questions that they ask, that require them to integrate all of the disparate parts of their education in a single moment. Where can they do that? That's what lifelong learning is for. They should be learning throughout their whole lives. As a Center for Lifelong Learning, what we do is provide structured opportunities for that integrative insight building and thinking and reflection to happen. So hopefully they can take those insights, integrate them back into their practice, and go back into their work with a new angle and a vision on how to respond best to the work before them.
Helen, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been a pleasure getting to know you better.
I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and the chance to let people know a little bit more about this great work that we're doing here at the Center.
Absolutely. If you would like to learn more about the Center for Lifelong Learning, please visit our website at ctsnet.edu or send us an email at lifelonglearning.cts.edu. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.